After our parents died, my brother convinced me I had to keep paying property taxes for the house he was living in. Whenever I questioned it, he reframed it as me being selfish or disrespecting our parents' memory until I started doubting myself. The pressure didn't stop, and neither did the guilt. Eventually, I did something to make it stop, something I never thought I'd do, and I still don't know if I went too far. My brother says I'm greedy for demanding money from him after our parents died. He says I'm tearing the family apart. I say I'm done paying for his life. Here's the part that makes everyone uncomfortable. Everyone agrees inheritance is supposed to be fair, split evenly, no drama, no resentment. Until one person has been living off the same house for decades, and the other one has been paying for their own life the entire time. Now my brother says I'm heartless for asking him to buy something I supposedly got for free. He says family doesn't charge family. He says I'm choosing money over blood. And the fallout has been brutal. Half my family thinks I'm cruel. The other half refuses to get involved at all. Some won't even answer my calls anymore. But this situation didn't start when our parents died. It started long before that, long before lawyers, long before inheritance paperwork. It started with a house that was never just a house. This was my dad's childhood home, the place every holiday circled back to, the place all of us lived at some point, siblings, friends, even cousins passing through. And there was always one rule. If you lived there, you contributed. Rent, bills, property taxes. Everyone did it. Everyone except my brother. And yes, he's 51 years old. He's the oldest. He works, he makes good money, but he has never paid a single dime toward that house. Not to my dad, not to my mom, not to anyone. He lived there his entire life, except for 7 years when he was married. When that ended, he moved right back in like nothing had changed. And somehow, it was always fine. At least, that's what we all told ourselves. Looking back, I don't think I noticed how strange it was. Or maybe I noticed and just didn't want to say anything. Because families have unspoken rules. You don't rock the boat. You don't question arrangements that work. You don't bring up money when parents are still alive. So we didn't. Meanwhile, my mom handled his finances for him, managed his money, paid things on his behalf like he was still a kid. And maybe that's why this hurts as much as it does now. Because while he stayed, I left. I paid rent. I paid bills. I built a life that fit inside my budget. I took on a mortgage, responsibilities, the kind of pressure you don't get to hand off to someone else. And I never asked him to help me, not once. Then our parents passed. Grief changes everything. Suddenly, you're mourning and making financial decisions and trying not to say something you can't take back. The house was left to both of us, 50-50, equal, on paper. But paper doesn't show context. Paper doesn't show history. Paper doesn't show who's been paying and who hasn't. And when the bills started coming in again, that's when reality showed up. Because my brother kept living there, and the property taxes were still due, the utilities were still running, the maintenance still needed to be done. And somehow, the expectation was that I would help cover it, for a house I don't live in, for a life I'm not part of. That's when I said no. Not angrily, not dramatically, just no. I told him I wasn't going to pay for his bills. I told him I couldn't afford to carry 2 households. And I told him if he wanted to stay in the house, he needed to buy my half. That's when everything exploded. And that's where I need you to judge this. Because depending on who you ask, I'm either finally standing up for myself or I'm the worst kind of sibling. So before you decide, let me tell you exactly how he reacted. I need to explain who I am in this story, because that matters. I'm not someone who's been sitting around waiting for a payout. I moved out years ago. I built my life around what I could afford, not what I hoped would work out. I pay a mortgage every month, utilities, insurance, groceries, repairs that never seem to end. I learned early on that if something breaks, there isn't anyone else coming to fix it for me. So I planned accordingly. I worked. I budgeted. I lived within my means. And I never assumed anyone would carry me. My brother never really left. He stayed in that house through his 20s, through his 30s, into his 40s. When he got married, he moved out for 7 years. When that ended, he moved right back in like it was temporary. Except temporary turned into permanent. No rent, no bills, no property tax. Just the same room, the same routine, the same safety net. And while everyone else grew up, he stayed exactly where he was. Here's the part that's hard to explain without sounding bitter. I didn't resent him at first. It felt easier to tell myself that everyone's life works differently, that maybe he needed the help more than I did, that it wasn't my place to question how our parents handle things. So I didn't. I showed up for holidays. I smiled through conversations. I left at the end of the night and went back to my own responsibilities. And every time I did, I felt the difference just a little more. Because when I paid my mortgage, there was no backup plan. When my bills went up, I adjusted. When something broke, I figured it out. Meanwhile, he had a house that never asked him for anything, and no one ever said it out loud, but everyone knew it. And this is where the imbalance started, not with the inheritance, not with the argument, but with years of one person being protected and another being expected to manage on their own. At the time, it felt small, manageable, something I could ignore. I didn't realize how heavy it was until I was asked to carry it again, after our parents were gone. And that's when the quiet resentment turned into a question I couldn't avoid anymore. When my brother first stayed at home as an adult, no one questioned it. It was easy to justify in the beginning. Housing was expensive, family helps family, plenty of people lived with their parents for a few extra years. At first, it felt temporary, a stepping stone, a normal phase before moving on. Everyone assumed he was contributing in some way. Maybe not a full rent check, but something. Covering utilities, helping with property taxes, pitching in where it mattered. That's what adults do. And for a long time, none of us asked. As the years passed, it just became routine. He had his room, his schedule, his place at the table. My parents never complained out loud. They never asked him to leave. They never brought it up at family gatherings. So again, we didn't either. It felt rude to question something that seemed accepted. The truth didn't come out all at once. It came in pieces. A comment here, a passing remark there, a bill that got mentioned casually, a conversation that stopped a little too quickly. And slowly, uncomfortably, it became clear. He wasn't helping at all. No rent, no bills, no property tax. Not now, not before, not ever. Meanwhile, he was working, not barely scraping by, not struggling. He had a solid job, a good income, the kind of paycheck that could easily cover basic living expenses. And still, nothing. The part that still shocks me, my mom managed his money. Not advice, not guidance. She handled it for him. Paid things, organized accounts, made sure he was okay. Like he was still a teenager who couldn't be trusted with his own finances. And yes, he's 51. When I finally let that sink in, something shifted for me. Because this wasn't about bad luck, or a rough patch, or needing help for a short time. This was a system where he was protected from responsibility and everyone else was expected to understand. I started looking back in moments that didn't make sense before. Why he never worried about expenses, why he reacted defensively when money came up, why he talked about the house like it already belonged to him. And that's when the situation stopped feeling harmless, because it wasn't just a favor anymore. It was a lifetime of being carried, and I was about to be asked to carry him too. Once I really understood what was happening, I couldn't unsee it, because it wasn't just me. Every other sibling who stayed in that house at some point paid something. Rent, utilities, property taxes when needed. Even friends who needed a place for a while paid their share. No one lived there for free. No one except him. And that's the part that slowly started eating at me. I started replaying old conversations in my head. Times when my parents stressed about money. Times when repairs were needed. Times when expenses came up casually, like everyone was pitching in. Except he wasn't. He benefited from the same roof, the same heat, the same security, without contributing a cent. And the worst part is that no one ever held him accountable. Not because they didn't know, but because it was easier not to. Family dynamics are strange that way. One person becomes the responsible one, another becomes the one who needs help. And over time, those roles stop being questioned. They just exist, even when they don't make sense anymore. I don't think I noticed how angry I was until it was too late. Not explosive anger, not yelling. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up when you write a check. The kind that sits in your chest when you realize you're expected to be understanding again. I told myself it didn't matter, that it wasn't my problem, that my parents made their choices. But resentment doesn't stay quiet forever. Sometimes I wonder, if I had said something years ago, would this be different now? If I had questioned it earlier, would anyone have listened? Or would I have been told the same thing I hear now? Don't make a big deal out of it. That's just how he is. Family helps family. So I stayed silent, and that silence came with a cost. Because when our parents were gone and the responsibility landed in our laps, all that unspoken history showed up at once. And suddenly, I was expected to pretend none of it mattered, like it had all been fair, like we were starting from the same place. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about everything we had never talked about. When our parents passed, everything went quiet in a way I wasn't prepared for. The house felt different. Not empty exactly, just heavier. Grief doesn't arrive neatly. It overlaps with paperwork, with phone calls, with decisions you don't feel ready to make. One moment you're remembering birthdays and holidays. The next you're signing documents and sorting through legal details. That's how it was for us. We were all still processing the loss when the conversation about the house came up. No dramatic announcement, no emotional speech, just facts. The house was left to both of us, split evenly, 50-50. On paper, it sounded simple, fair, clean. But grief has a way of blurring things, because while I was thinking about memories, he was already living there, sleeping in the same room, using the same kitchen, going on with life in the same space where everything had just ended for the rest of us. And I don't say that as an accusation, it's just reality. At first, I didn't push. It felt wrong to bring up money while we were still mourning, wrong to question anything so soon. So I stayed quiet again. I told myself there would be time to sort it out later, that everyone would be reasonable. Then the bills arrived. Property tax notices, utilities, maintenance issues that don't pause for grief. That's when reality hit, because the house wasn't just an emotional inheritance, it was a financial one. And suddenly there were expectations forming that no one had actually said out loud. Expectations that I would help pay, that things would continue as they always had, as if nothing had changed, except everything had. I remember staring at the paperwork and feeling something settle in my chest, a realization I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't just grieving my parents, I was inheriting a situation, one that had been building quietly for decades, and now, for the first time, it was my responsibility to deal with it, whether I wanted to or not. After the funeral arrangements were done, life didn't pause the way I wished it would. The house kept running, lights turned on and off, water still flowed, the mailbox kept filling up. My brother stayed right where he was. Same routine, same comfort, same expectation that the house was simply his to live in, and the bills kept coming. Property taxes didn't disappear because we were grieving. Utilities didn't stop because things were complicated. Repairs still needed to be handled, and suddenly my name was on half of it. At first, I assumed this would be a short conversation, a practical one. I figured we would talk it through like adults. He's living there, he covers the costs, or we come up with another arrangement. That seemed reasonable to me. Because I already have a mortgage, I already budget for my own life, my own responsibilities, my own home. Every dollar I spend is planned. So when I started getting messages about expenses for a house I don't live in, I felt something tighten. Not panic, clarity. Why should I pay for a house I don't live in? Why should I help cover utilities I don't use? Why should I split property taxes for a place that only one of us benefits from? Those weren't emotional questions to me. They were practical ones. I brought it up carefully. I didn't accuse him. I didn't bring up the past. I simply said I couldn't afford to keep paying for two households, that I wasn't going to cover his living expenses, and that we needed to figure out a long-term solution. I thought this part was obvious. Apparently, it wasn't, because the moment I said I wasn't paying, the entire tone changed. What I thought was a straightforward conversation suddenly felt like a betrayal, like I had broken an unspoken rule, one I didn't even know I was still following. And that's when I realized we were not having the same conversation at all. I waited before bringing it up again. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to do it right. I wanted the conversation to be calm, adult, clear. So when we finally sat down to talk, I didn't lead with frustration or history. I led with options. I told him there were really only two paths forward. One, he buys my half of the house. He keeps living there. Nothing changes for him day to day. He just compensates me for my share. Or two, we sell the house, split it evenly. Clean break, both of us move forward. I explained that I wasn't trying to push him out overnight. I wasn't trying to punish him. I just couldn't keep paying into something I wasn't using. I already have a home. I already have obligations. I needed this to be fair. I remember how carefully I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I didn't bring up decades of resentment. I just said no. No, I wouldn't keep paying. No, I wouldn't pretend this was sustainable. No, I wouldn't absorb the cost to keep things comfortable for him. For a moment, he didn't say anything. And then his face changed. That's when he exploded. He accused me of being greedy, said I was obsessed with money, said I was cold for even bringing it up so soon, said I was acting like a stranger instead of a sibling. Then he said the thing that hit hardest. He asked why he should give me money for something I got for free. I didn't respond right away, because I didn't even know how to unpack that. To him, the house wasn't an inheritance we shared. It was already his. And me asking for my half felt to him like theft, like I was taking something away instead of claiming what was legally mine. He said I was forcing him out of his childhood home, said I was choosing money over family, said our parents would be ashamed of me. And suddenly, this wasn't a practical discussion anymore. It was emotional, personal, loaded with years of unspoken expectations. I realized then that he hadn't heard my options at all. All he heard was loss. And in his mind, I was the one causing it. That's when I understood how far apart we really were. Because I thought I was drawing a reasonable boundary, and he thought I was betraying him. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back to the way things were before. Once he started, he didn't stop. Every sentence landed heavier than the last. He told me I was selfish, that I had no compassion, that money had changed me. He kept repeating the same question over and over. Why should I pay you for something you got for free? As if inheritance erased value, as if time and responsibility didn't matter, as if my share was somehow less real because I didn't live there. Then he shifted. He said I was choosing money over family. That hurt more than I expected, because I had never once asked him for help, never relied on him financially, never expected him to sacrifice for me, and now I was being told I was the one tearing us apart. I felt everything at once. Shock, because I didn't recognize the person in front of me. Guilt, because part of me wondered if I really was being too harsh. Anger, because none of this was new, and yet I was being painted as the villain. I stood there listening, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to react the way he clearly expected me to. Then he said it. He said I was kicking him out of his childhood home. That sentence sat between us, heavy, final, because that's not what I was doing. I wasn't changing the locks. I wasn't giving him a deadline. I wasn't forcing him onto the street. But in his mind, that's what this was, me taking something away. He told me he had nowhere else to go, that he had built his entire life around that house, that I was ripping away his stability. And suddenly, decades of choices were being laid at my feet like they were my responsibility. I wanted to scream that I hadn't done this to him, that he had years to plan differently, years to prepare, years to contribute. But I didn't. I just stood there, feeling the weight of his words settle into places I didn't know were still raw. Because no matter how logical my reasons were, being told you're destroying your family does something to you. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I was standing my ground or crossing a line I wouldn't be able to walk back from. The argument didn't stay between us. It never does. Within days, family members started reaching out, some cautiously, some aggressively, some pretending to be neutral while clearly leaning one way. Everyone had an opinion. A few told me I was right. Quietly, almost apologetically, they said it made sense, that it wasn't fair to expect me to pay for a house I didn't live in, that this should have been addressed years ago. But most of the messages went the other way. They told me I needed to be patient, that my brother was grieving too, that he was fragile, that this wasn't the time to push. They reminded me how much the house meant to him, how long he'd lived there, how hard change would be. And then they said the line that still echoes in my head. Your parents wouldn't want this. That sentence still haunts me, because it shuts down everything. It turns a practical issue into a moral failure. How do you argue with what the dead would have wanted? Every time someone said it, I felt smaller, like I was being asked to prove my love by sacrificing something concrete, like keeping the peace mattered more than being treated fairly. And I started questioning myself, not just my decision, but my character. Am I cold or just done being used? Am I heartless for finally setting a boundary? Or is this what happens when you stop playing the role everyone expects you to play? I replayed the conversation with my brother over and over, wondering if I should have softened it, if I should have waited longer, if I should have offered more time. But no matter how many versions I ran through my head, the core problem stayed the same. I was being asked to pay for a life that wasn't mine. And if I agreed now, there would never be a moment when it suddenly became fair. That's what scared me the most. Not losing my brother, but realizing that if I gave in, this wouldn't end. It would just become permanent. And I wasn't sure I could live with that, even if everyone else thought I should. This is where it stops being simple. Because if I step back and look at it honestly, I can see his side too. He lived in that house almost his entire life. Not just stayed there, lived there. His memories are tied to every room, every sound, every routine. That house isn't just property to him, it's stability, it's familiarity. It's the last place our parents existed as more than memories. And yes, he's grieving too. He lost them just like I did. Maybe in a different way, but the loss is still real. From his perspective, everything he knows is being threatened all at once, and I understand why that feels unbearable. But then there's my side, the part that's harder for people to sit with. He lived there for decades without paying rent, without covering bills, without contributing to property taxes, while working, while earning, while being fully capable. That didn't happen by accident. And now I legally own half that house, not as a favor, not as a technicality, as a rightful inheritance. Fairness matters, not just emotionally, but financially. I didn't get decades of free housing. I didn't get someone managing my money for me. I didn't get to delay adulthood. I built my life without that safety net. And now I'm being asked to ignore all of that, to absorb more responsibility because he's uncomfortable with change. This is the space no one wants to stay in, where both people are hurting, where both arguments make sense, where there isn't a clean villain. I don't want to take something away from him, but I also don't want to keep giving up parts of my life to protect his. And that's the question I keep coming back to. At what point does understanding someone's pain mean ignoring your own? Because once you cross that line, it's hard to know where it ends. I keep coming back to one question. At what point does compassion turn into enabling? Because for most of our lives, compassion was the excuse. He needs help. He's figuring things out. It's just temporary. And years passed, then decades. I think about how easy it is to confuse kindness with avoidance, avoiding conflict, avoiding discomfort, avoiding hard conversations, letting things continue because stopping them feels worse. I wonder how many decisions were made simply because they were easier in the moment, and how many of those decisions shaped where we are now. And this is where I started questioning myself, not just my choice, but my role. Did my silence help create this? Did my willingness to let it go teach him that nothing would ever change? I replay the moments I said no, the calm in my voice, the certainty I felt, and then the doubt that followed. Because saying no felt cruel, even though saying yes would have cost me. I sit with the idea that maybe I should have been more patient, that maybe I should have given him more time. And then I ask myself another question. How much time is enough? Another year? 5 more? The rest of his life? There's a quiet fear underneath all of this, that if I give in now, I'll never stop giving, that the expectation will become permanent, that my role will always be to make things easier for him. I don't want to be resentful. I don't want to be bitter, but I also don't want to disappear inside someone else's comfort. And when I sit with that truth, the silence answers back. Because compassion shouldn't require self-erasure, and if it does, then maybe something has already gone wrong. Right now, nothing is resolved. There's no agreement, no compromise, no clear path forward. The house still belongs to both of us. On paper, we're equal owners. In reality, we're living in 2 completely different versions of it. He's still there, still using the space, still expecting things to stay the same. And I'm still here, paying my own bills, carrying my own responsibilities, waiting for the next conversation that neither of us wants to have. We don't talk much anymore. When we do, it's careful, measured, like we're both afraid of saying the wrong thing and making it worse. Every discussion circles back to the same point and stops. He feels threatened, I feel cornered, and neither of us feels understood. Family gatherings feel strained now. Conversations trail off when we enter the room. People choose their words carefully, No one wants to be the one who brings it up, but it's always there, unspoken, unresolved. I keep hoping time will soften things, that grief will settle, that perspective will shift. But time doesn't pay property taxes. Time doesn't cover utilities. Time doesn't turn an unfair situation into a fair one. I don't want to lose my brother. I don't want this to be the thing that defines us for the rest of our lives. But I also can't keep paying for his life. I can't keep pretending this is sustainable. And until one of us moves, until someone gives, we're stuck right here, sharing a house on paper and a silence that feels heavier than any argument we've had so far. I know grief makes people irrational. I know money changes families in ways no one wants to admit. And I know that loss doesn't come with a manual for how to divide what's left behind. But I also know this. I've spent my entire life being the responsible one, the one who moved out, the one who paid rent, the one who planned ahead, the one who didn't ask to be carried. I didn't complain then. I didn't keep score. I just lived my life and assumed fairness would eventually catch up. Maybe I should have let it go. Maybe I should have paid just to keep the peace. Maybe sacrificing my share would have been easier than standing my ground. I think about that a lot. Or maybe this was the first time I finally said no. The first time I refused to absorb someone else's choices. The first time I chose fairness over comfort. I never wanted to hurt my brother. I never wanted money to come between us. But I also don't think asking for my half makes me a villain. So now I'm asking you. Am I cold or just done being used? Am I selfish or finally setting a boundary? So, am I the a-hole?